All right. Welcome back to MTG Anonymous. It has been a long time since I've made a deck review. So, there's no real reason to have a conversation on what happened. We're just going to go with the flow. So, today we have Mono Black Aristocrats. This is historic, because obviously I only play historic, since I don't play MTG Arena very often. This is really heavy on 1-drops. This deck focuses on mill, discard, and then also pretty much anything you can think of with black. We also make a lot of tokens in this deck as well. And did I mention mill? If you don't remember, mill is my favorite thing to do in Magic the Gathering. But let's go ahead and do the next step. So first off, we have Cauldron Familiar. If you don't remember this card, for 1 black, you get Creature Cat. Cauldron Familiar can't block. When it enters, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. And then also you sacrifice a food. Return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you don't remember this super annoying card, it combos with Witch's Oven, but we will get to that when we get to it. Next is Devour Intellect. For 1 black, it's a sorcery. Target opponent discards a card. If mana from a treasure was spent to cast a spell, which we can make, instead that player reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, then that player discards that card. So for that, Tergrid is very good with this card. We'll get to Tergrid when we get to it. Next, we have 4 different copies of Duress. I didn't have any matching copies, so I had to do this. Duress is for 1 black, a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land, non-creature card from it. That player discards that card. Again, really good for Tergrid. Unfortunately, it can only really get like artifacts or enchantments, since we can't get creatures or lands, but that's okay, because there are plenty of decks, especially with the new set, that can start your engines, and you can really have this deck take off depending on the enchantment that you get. Next is Hopeless Nightmare. For 1 black is an enchantment. When this enchantment enters, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. When this enchantment is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, scry 2. And then for 2 and a black, you can sacrifice this enchantment. Really, this is just here to catch removal. Most of the time, your opponents are going to blow it up. If not, we can sacrifice the enchantment just for the scry 2 if we need to. Again, this is really here just to catch removal. That's it. Tinybones, the Pickpocket. For 1 black, legendary creature, skeleton rogue with Death Touch. Whenever Tinybones deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So again, we want to steal things, especially if it enters the battlefield effects. Also preferably artifacts, since we do have cards that interact with artifacts going into graveyards. But let's go next. Altar the Brood. If you don't remember, Altar the Brood is my favorite card, and I could probably read it without even looking. So Altar the Brood says, for 1, it's an artifact. Whenever another permanent you control enters, each opponent mills a card. So with Witch's Oven and the Cauldron Familiar, you pretty much can mill 2 cards every turn. And then since we have 4 of them, if we have all 4 out, that would be 8 cards every turn. You would mill your opponent out very fast. Essentially, the way we'd want to play, Altar the Brood comes out first, and then we play another land, and whatever else we have, we want to get all the Altars of the Broods out fast. To keep this deck cheap, there are no tutors, so hopefully we get it. If we don't, it's not the end of the world. We have other ways to mill, and mill really isn't even the way we want to kill our opponents, but it does help us with Tinybones. Witch's Oven. For 1 colorless, it's an artifact. Tap, sacrifice a creature, create a food token. If the sacrificed creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens instead. So this card really helps the Cauldron Familiar dodge removal, because every single time they try to remove it, I am just going to sacrifice it and then bring it back. Now, if our opponent has a Tergrid, that's bad, but typically that doesn't happen. That's only happened once, and it was a fun time. So next, Mariette Apprentice. This is really in here for the graveyard effect, because if I didn't mention, this is an Aristocrats deck. So it says for 1 and a black, fabricate 1, and then fabricate is when this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it, or create a colorless servo artifact creature token instead. But whenever a creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, into a graveyard specifically from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So that's where Tinybones and Tergrid both are very, very effective with this strategy. Mephitic Drought for 1 and a black. It's an artifact. When this artifact enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So again, we're going to play it. Most of the time, people are going to blow it up because they don't read what this card does. We get to draw from it. Essentially, it's just here to catch the removal. We also have a way to pull it out of our graveyard and put it back onto the battlefield. So the other Tinybones, Trinket Thief for 1 black, legendary creature, skeleton rogue. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discarded a card this turn, you draw a card and you lose a life. 4 black. Each opponent with no cards in hand loses 10 life. We are pretty much going to try to make our opponent discard cards every single time we can. And essentially, we make sure that their hand is empty. Tinybone swings pretty much every turn. Not that it needs to, but once we get to 6 mana, which is not very difficult for this deck, each opponent would then lose 10 life, because we're going to make sure that they have no cards in hand. Underhanded Design for 1 and a black. Enchantment, whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, artifact, whenever an artifact you control enters the battlefield, you may pay 1. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is really here for the second part, but we can deal a little bit of chip damage as things enter, especially with Tinybones the pickpocket. And then for 1 and a black, sacrifice this enchantment, destroy target creature, activate only if you control 2 or more artifacts. We will almost always control 2 or more artifacts, so it's not really a complaint. Waste Not for 1 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, create a 2/2 zombie creature token. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, add 2 black. And whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So we are more interested in the draw card portion, especially since I don't really care about creatures per se. Now granted, Marionette Apprentice cares, but the rest of the cards don't, so it doesn't matter. Particularly, we want the non-creature, non-land so we can draw cards. Fortuitous Find for 2 and a black. Choose 1 or both. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, and return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So basically, we want something to die. Probably most of the time it's Marionette Apprentice or Marionette Master, and then one of the artifacts, which has almost always been Realm Breaker because everyone hates that card, or Ultra the Brood because no one likes to mill. Realm Breaker, the Invasion Tree for 3, legendary artifact, 2 and tap. Target opponent mills 3 cards, put a land card from their graveyard onto the battlefield tapped under your control. It gains if this land would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. And then for 10 and tap, sacrifice Realm Breaker, search your library for any number of Praetor cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. We will never do that second part, because we have no Praetors in this deck, but tapping and making them mill, which is part of our strategy. Alter the Brood's going to hit a couple lands on its own, so we're able to grab them. It ramps us pretty much every other turn or so, especially since I'm on the lower end of swamps, since I only have 22 instead of 24. We really need to try to make as much extra mana as we can. Waste Not helps with this as well. So basically the idea is Waste Not if they discard a land, use Realm Breaker. If they don't and we have no land left over, we use this. We can also use Realm Breaker on their turn. So if they put anything on top of their library, we can mill those cards. So this is a really good artifact for this deck. Pact All Terror for 3 and a black. Is an artifact creature toy. Whenever this creature or another artifact you control enters, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. Again, Cauldron Familiar, making the food tokens, Alter the Broods because they're cheap, the Marionette Apprentice and Master with Fabricate, Realm Breaker with its ability, Tinybones with its ability to steal, This is a very, very good card in this deck. Especially since now Marionette Master sees when things die, and then Packed Doll Terror sees when things enter. Ritual of Soot, in case we're having like an overrun deck, because white is very, very, very popular right now. 2 black, destroy all creatures with mana value 3 or less. This does catch the Cauldron Familiar, well, pretty much every card except for like Packed Doll, Terror, or the Marionette Master get caught by this card on our side, but that's okay because we have the way to bring them back with Fortuitous Finds, or we just leave them and then start stealing our opponent's stuff. Tergrid got a Fright. We have 2 of you in this deck because we want both sides. So the most important side for 3 black, it's a legendary creature god with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And then her Lantern says 3 and a black. Target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent of their choice or discard a card. That's the tap ability. And then for 3 and a black, untap Tergrid's Lantern. It's almost impossible for us to not get both of these, especially since we're able to draw cards pretty regularly. Tergrid is very good because we want our opponent to sacrifice, especially like Sagas or any of the flip enchantments, seeing as they sacrifice themselves unless they exile. If they exile, we can't do anything, so we don't care. But if they don't, then this is perfect. And then Tergrid's Lantern combos with Tergrid, because obviously as we tap it, they sacrifice something or discard a card, and we get that. Marionette Master, as I said, one of the staples of this deck. Once we get 6 mana, we preferably have it in our hand. It's a human artificer for 4 black. Fabricate 3, which again means when it enters the battlefield, put 3 counters on it or create 3 Cerbos. Most of the time we're going to create Cerbos and let them die. But whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to this creature's power. If we fabricate 3, every time an artifact dies, they lose 4. If we don't, they lose 1. But if we have the Marionette Apprentice out, then we are perfectly fine with letting this go to 4, because now every time something dies, 5. And then Blood Money is basically the way to win the game. So preferably after we have Marionette Master in our hand already, we use Blood Money, which says destroy all creatures for each non-token creature destroyed this way. You create a tapped treasure token. So use Blood Money, destroy all the creatures, preferably get 6 or 7 tapped treasures, which also, if Altar of the Brood is out, that's also 6 or 7 milled cards. And Marionette Master would then basically kill our opponent as we destroy the treasures, as we sacrifice the treasures. And then obviously Swamp. I was too lazy to grab more non-swamp cards. There are obviously a whole bunch of very good non-basics that you can get, especially if they're ones that like care about the amount of mana pips. But regardless, this is real simple deck. I made this without burning any of my wild cards because I want to wait until the next set comes out to use them. So yeah. Anyway, if you have any advice or ideas on cards that could go in this deck, let me know. I'm trying to get some stuff straight so I can do some gameplay on Twitch. But preferably, I'll get to silver before diamond before I do that. But regardless, anyways, this has been MTG Anonymous, also known as Paul, not on the internet. If you need something, there's nothing I can help you with, so have a great day. Peace.